Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home, the show dedicated to helping veterinarians, vet techs, dog trainers, shelter and rescue workers, pet sitters, and all the other animal-crazy pet professionals manage their stress and find more joy. I'm your host, Colleen Pilar, and I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite app so that you won't miss a single episode. This episode is brought to you by our free community, the Circle of Resilient and Thriving Pet Professionals. If you like the ideas shared here, then you're invited to continue the conversation with other lifelong learners in the community. You can find out more at colleenpilar.com. It's the perfect place for you to learn cool stuff, feel good, and take action to create the life you love. Come join us. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Jodi Smith, and Jodi is a licensed clinical social worker, and her business name is Play is Powerful, which is a pretty awesome place to start. So let's just start right there. Tell us a little bit about your work, and what does that mean, Play is Powerful?
So as you mentioned, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in working with children, and I'm a registered play therapist, which means play is a big part of what I do. And real briefly, because play therapy is often misunderstood in the mental health field, so in the broader field as well. And so it does not mean that I am just playing with kids. It does mean I get to play a lot with the people I work with, which is also not just kids. Although kids are my specialty, I work with people of all ages. And play therapy is more of kind of an attitude and presence of being versus an action. So it's a much more lighthearted and relaxed approach to therapy than maybe the typical, especially when people maybe think about, kind of a Freudian approach with somebody sitting on a couch and getting no feedback from. And so one of the things we know in the world is that words are just a small part of how we communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, we talk about that a lot with dogs. It's one of the things I explain to. Again, all those skills we learn in learning how to read people can translate to all animals, not just human animals. But much of the work that you're trained in the mental health field is based on verbal interaction and dismisses so much else. And so not only in understanding communication, but also in expression. And so there's many different ways to express yourself other than just through words. And so in play therapy, we look at play. And play is different for every individual and depending often on age, gender, etc., but also expressive. So art, sand, other things. And then I've also incorporated animals in my work. So as an animal-assisted therapist, I have 2 dogs who are frequently in the office with me, and they are incorporated in a lot of different ways. So from a play therapy standpoint, again, how play for both of my dogs is different. And so sometimes it's a very active approach where kids or adults or teens come in and we very purposely incorporate what we're doing with the animals. And other times they're more in a traditional therapy stance where they're there kind of as a de-stressor and a connector and all of that. So that's kind of how animals have ended up merging in Play is Powerful, per se. And dogs are great at play.
Oh, yeah.
Which, again, we're going to already go on a stance. I've also worked a lot in doing volunteer work, especially with my older dog, through Pet Partners and Hope Animal Assisted Crisis Response. And I have met so many dog handlers and dog owners who try and tell me that their dog doesn't play. Never played, doesn't like play, doesn't know how to play. And my first reaction is just sadness because all animals play. However, highly stressed animals, and again, human, dog, bear, whatever, don't, right? They have to have safety to play. So when I hear about people telling me their dogs don't play, I immediately go into the sadness of why not? What's gotten in the way of them being able to play and all of that, which is just really, really sad. And in human world, we also do work really hard to dismiss the value of play and try and get kids to play less and less and become adults less more quickly, even though we know that play for adults is healing and necessary for health, right? So,
Mhm.
okay. So
And something we lose so
yeah,
quickly. Like it's
especially women,
mhm. Yeah.
especially women. So I've done a lot of training for play therapists and for people working with animals. And I always say, if I bring toys and throw them on the middle of a table, the men in the room dig right in. They don't even hesitate. They'll pick up an army man, they'll pick up a figure and start playing. And many women in the room will just sit there and stare and go like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And it takes a while for them to be able to relax and revert back to, "Now, you know how to do this. It's there. You've just you just pushed it aside for so long for a lot of different reasons, right? Whereas men are a little better, not all, but at continuing it in their lives, right? And
Yeah, I just had a flashback while you were saying that, and it sent me way, way back to my office days, which is way, way back. And I was in a seminar where they put out toys on the table, um, and I didn't touch them. I did not, but I wanted to. There was one that I don't even remember what it was, but I remember there was one particular thing that I was like, well, I mean, that's the one I would play with if I were going to play, but I'm not going to do that. And there was something I was quite young at the time. I was, probably just out of college and trying to be really professional and, so I certainly didn't want to be seen as this person who was frivolous or silly or, didn't have ideas that were worth hearing, while holding some sort of fidget toy. But yeah, that
yeah,
it is true that we step away from play as if it is no longer valuable, but it has such gifts for us all the way through our life. And I think that's actually one of the things that people say is so freeing about getting older is that we sometimes allow ourselves to lean a little bit more into play again. Like
mm,
we start giving ourselves permission that we've done the busy stuff and now there's a little more space for play, whatever that might be for different people.
but how sad that we have to wait for that, right? That we have to
Yeah.
that. And what if we didn't? What value would that bring back to us? And how does that play out in so many different aspects of our world? And I think part of it is recognizing that play does evolve, right? Even if
Mhm.
you keep it in your life, it looks different as
Mhm.
you grow up. Your interests change, and yeah. So what is so one of the questions is who defines what play is? The player, right? So what
Yeah.
play may be different for you. It may actually be. I always use my favorite example is dance. For
Mhm.
many, dance is play and fun. Not for my husband. It is
Mhm.
not play or fun for him.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. That is true. It has not been for me, because I've always felt observed and that I'm doing it wrong, and I do not have great rhythm, and then if anyone points out that I don't have great rhythm, then my rhythm gets worse, like 100%. But what I'm noticing as a grandparent is my give a darn meter has started to go away. So I do dance with my granddaughter fairly often, even when my husband can walk through the room and totally see me dancing badly off rhythm. And, and that's something like he's always known I've had no rhythm, but he hasn't actually gotten to witness me dancing badly for most of our marriage because there's something bad about that. And now I'm like, "Yes, but Melanie is dancing badly and joyfully, so I am dancing badly and joyfully with her." And
Right. You're
it's
going
kind of
back
fun.
to your old self, right?
Mhm.
'Cause for 2, you did. And then adults, usually, sometimes other kids, tease, and usually not even meant in a mean way. They're
Yeah.
not trying to squash your spirit.
Yeah,
And yet
just
they
like,
do.
"Oh, that's funny or fun how you're doing that," but not like, "Oh, that's awful."
Right,
But
right, right. Exactly. And that is one of the things that I think has been wonderful for me in my world, working with kids so much is my belief is to work effectively with kids and teenagers in particular, you need to be able to let that go.
Mhm.
Okay with looking silly and joining them in their joy. Um, and it's hard at first because and the unfortunate thing is I'm amazing at that in a room with kids. But a bunch of adults in the room, that joy still, that's all the old stuff still comes back up, and I'm not.
Yep. Yep. There we are. Busy
Right?
being human.
Busy being human. It's interesting because that then brings me back to dog stuff. I'm thinking, I think sometimes dog owners also think that if their dog is playing or doing something, that's also not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's bad, especially in the therapy dog world. Our dogs often, and there's some change in this now, but the old school thought is therapy dogs are serious, right?
Yeah.
Which calm is serious, playful is not serious, and I think that that's often true. There's a lot of places and times where dogs need to be calm and serious. But there's also lots of opportunities where a lighter side of a therapy dog is actually very useful and healing in of itself. Again, think about who doesn't like watching dogs play,
Yeah.
right? Just like
Yeah.
watching kids play. It makes you laugh. It's fun. Just that
Mm-hmm.
alone. I think it's just scary for a lot of handlers because they don't understand it or they don't know. And I hate this word, but it comes up so much. They can't control it.
That's what was just coming up for me, that there can be like this piece of, because I currently have a puppy who's almost one. I'm really looking forward to adulthood because he's like fun, 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 nippy crazy machine. And I'm like, oh, Rocky, dial it down. So controlled in some ways feels better to me. It's not joyful, it's not fun, but the fun can escalate in ways that I don't think are fun. And he still does. Like he's not hurting. If I was another dog, he's not hurting me in that sense. But because I'm a human covered with wimpy human skin, sometimes I'm like, wow, you're nippy. Stop.
Predictable. Unpredictable is also scary
Hmm.
and not always appropriate in a therapy dog situation, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
When you
So,
already have other variables that are unpredictable.
yeah, so many unpredictable variables in any sort of in any sort of situation with an animal and also in any sort of situation with therapy, I would think. Um, One of the questions I like to ask all my guests is sort of how did you get from childhood to here? Because presumably, uh, play therapist was not your dream job at 10. So what was?
So at 10, my dream job was probably to be a marine biologist that trained dolphins or
Mhm.
some animals like that, like at SeaWorld or something
Yeah,
would be my dream job. And I was quickly told that was ridiculous.
of course,
Not even,
because nobody even does that. That's not even a real job.
I would even though I'd been to SeaWorld and I saw people do that, but
Yeah, and I've interviewed a number of them on my podcast. Amazingly enough, they went to dogs after doing those kinds of careers.
so then I moved on to and I was always I I was not a good student, but I did well in school. That's a whole nother podcast. But um, so then my next thing I was going to be a vet. So honestly, I was thinking about this, at 10, 12. I don't think I'd ever heard the dog trainer term. I don't think, I mean, in my world, dog
Yeah.
trainers did not exist. Our dogs wandered into our lives and were brought into, it wasn't until I was in high school that my mom purposely selected a dog, and so a trainer, which is interesting because I thought about training marine animals, but
Mhm.
training domestic animals was just not even a thought. So I loved animals and was good with animals. And so veterinarian, what else? I mean,
Exactly.
I'm a city girl, so there was not much else to do. And then, and actually, when I graduated high school, I went to school immediately to college at Cal Poly Pomona, which is a local polytechnic that specializes in in lots of things, but animals, and in preparing people to be vets. So I went into animal sciences, did a year, almost 2 years undergrad working in animal sciences and quickly learned that veterinary medicine was not where I was meant to be. And luckily for me, I went to, again, with a polytechnic school, you go straight into your major. So I didn't take any general education. I went right into animal sciences, which is nice. Otherwise, it might have been 4 years before I figured out that, oh, wait, I don't like this. And I was extremely ignorant. I mean, I was like, I'm going to be a vet. So I get these cute puppies and cats. And so go to Cal Poly and they're like, so for your first class, do you want to work with pigs, cows, horses, or sheep? No, I want to work with dogs or cats. Not. So I worked with pigs, which I loved. It was a great experience. But I also was in a class that had a lot of people who'd grown up working with animals, right? This was second nature to them. And I'm like in this class on cows, and they're like, so different species of cows. And I'm like, I thought you had boy cows and girl cows. I mean, I was really ignorant when it. And then I also found out you have to take a lot of chemistry. And chemistry was not my friend. Not my friend at all. So I decided I'm not going to do this, but I don't know what I'm going to do. So I dropped out of that because, you don't know what you're going to do. Just don't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And actually, no, first I switched my major to business, which anyone who knows me would just laugh and say business. Like, okay, great. So I did that for a semester and went, yeah, that's not me. Took some time off and kind of reflected and got some guidance and drew me back to when I was in high school. I took a psychology class. I loved it. I was a camp counselor. I'd done lots of things, but going into the mental health field was just not something that was valued in my world, both as something that people respected or as a way to make a viable income. So don't do that. So, and like I said, I was a good student. So good students at this era became like engineers or lawyers or doctors, and none of those things did I have really any. Even when I wanted to be a vet, everybody would be like, well, if you're going to be a vet, it takes the same amount to become a doctor, a real doctor, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, no, I have zero interest in that. That is not fun at all, right? So after some time, I found my way to psychology, got my bachelor's in psychology without, again, doing lots of around about and worked with a lot in the autism. And I was actually a nanny for a behavioralist. And so I got lots of training on behavioralism. His actually their their vanity plate on their car was operant. He's actually well known in the field in doing lots of behavioral stuff. And so I got a really strong background on behavioralism, which has come in handy later because later in the mental health field, they don't really cover much of it. And especially in the work with animals, it's very, very useful, but also with humans as well. And then I graduated and still didn't know what I was going to do. And actually signed up, got into a college to be a marriage and family therapist. And because I knew I didn't want to do 4 more years to become a PhD. That was just way too much. And the first semester, it was highly impacted and I got one class. So the young me was like, and again, I was older than that. I was not 21, but I was not 40. So the young me was like, well, one class, it will take me 10 years to graduate. So I'm not going to do this, which again, retrospectively doesn't make much sense, but it was the best. It was actually a really smart decision. So I went to work in the field at a residential facility with some emotionally disturbed boys. And there I met their counselor there was a psychologist. And he really encouraged me to go back to school. He's like, you've got great instinct, great insight. He's like, but you are not an MFT, Jodi. You're a social worker. And I was like, oh, social workers like give out welfare checks. I don't want to do that. And he's like, no, 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 no. There is this much broader field. And so he actually introduced me to the field of social work and the clinical places, which was beautiful. I would have never found it otherwise. And so I found my way into the field of social work. And I've never written a welfare check.
Well, good. That's really cool. And it's cool too how the detours aren't actually detours, you know?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that's interesting. I get a lot of it, you know, and I don't remember this as a child. It was probably there, but I know it's there more now that we start prepping our kids to decide what they're going to be at like 5,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I know I got a little bit of it just because adults don't know what else to say to kids. But now, even academically, I have fourth graders who have to write an essay on what they want to be. I'm like, and 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 then parents will bring their teenagers to me because they don't know what they want to be. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure I'm the right person for the parent. I'm absolutely the right person for the teen. So I'm like,
Mhm.
of course you don't know. How would you know what
Yeah.
you want to be when you grow up? And then I look at them and I say, I still don't know what I want
Mhm.
to be when I grow up, right? You don't even know what choices there are, right? Again, talk about I didn't know social work. I didn't know therapy animals was. I didn't know any of these were even options. Plus, new options keep coming available, right? I have a good friend who, about the age of 30, became a flight attendant, and I was like, that sounds like a lovely job. You get to go fly places. Didn't even. I mean, there's so many options. So yeah, how at 16 are you supposed to know and commit to, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the advice I always give them is, you're committing to a semester,
Mhm.
not 4 years. You're At the end of the semester, if you don't like it, you can change your mind. Parents
Mhm.
don't always love that advice, but kids come in. I mean, again, I don't remember being in that state, but I'm sure I was. That not only do I have to decide, I have to commit to this.
Yeah.
I'm committing to 4 years of my life. I'm committing to, and then the rest of my life. That's terrifying.
And so not how society is these days, and even really not entirely how it was those days,
Abs-
like, my career trajectory is not at all what I could have figured out as a child, and, not what anyone would have planned for me someone was if somebody was in charge, they wouldn't have written this out for me, and I'm super happy with how things are. But that you couldn't have seen it, and my husband retired after 35 years at the same company. So the job he got right out of college is the job he retired from. That is unheard of these days, and he only retired a couple years ago. It was unheard of even at that time. So, like, in his company, people would talk about, like, "Really? You never worked anywhere else?" And he'd be like, "Nope." I mean, he had jobs prior to college graduation. He'd been in the Navy, and he'd had, the summer jobs and those things as well, but his career was entirely at this one company, and the generation even before that had the retire and get the gold watch kind of mentality of, like, you work for Zenith for 40 years and then you retire. And yeah, uh, that was gone by the 80s. Now you work for someplace for 5 years. It's kind of amazing for many of the
Mhm.
more corporate jobs. Um, so when we have this pressure on kids to know or decide, or it really, I think, is a lack of imagination on our own part of, like, what to say to a kid.
Mhm.
And we're really just trying to get them to envision and share something with us, and we're envisioning too big and sharing, so they wind up with a limited pool of colors that they know to say: teacher, doctor, lawyer, vet, and then we act as if that was a commitment. Tricky. It's really tricky. So what what all of this discussion is leading us to is actually the words you shared with me, and I ask all my podcast guests to share words that have meaning to them. And I liked the words you shared when you shared them, but now I really see why these words resonate with you. And the words you shared were: "Not all who wander are lost," that famous quote from Tolkien. So tell me a little bit about that. When did those words come into your awareness, and what do they mean to you?
Well, it's interesting because it's a quote that many people are familiar with, but actually recently, so Christmas, my best friend gave me. I've known her since I was 11, so a long time. Um, and it was a little plaque, and it had this kind of boho looking female on it with all these words, but the saying was, not all who wander are lost. And she goes, I saw this and I immediately thought of you and had to give this to you. And honestly, when she gave it to me, for a second, I mean, I love the plaque, but I was like, really, this made you think of me? Because that's not necessarily how I see me, the whole picture of it, right? And then I took some time and, days and was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect for me in so many ways, right? In reflecting on my life, on reflecting on my beliefs. One of the things
Mhm.
that I share with clients frequently is again, wandering is when you figure stuff out. Wandering is
Mhm.
when you discover things. How many things I would not have in my life had I not wandered, right? I wouldn't have therapy dogs if I had not wandered. Um, and then also, this is another aside, is for about 2 years now, 2 years ago, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And so I have a D&D group that we play frequently. And D&D is largely based on Lord of the Rings lore, which is where the quote is from, which my friend who gave this to me had no clue that that was a connection. So it was one more connection to this quote where I was like, this has so much meaning for me. And it always kind of been there, but now is much more prevalent in my world or my awareness, I would say.
Mhm. I think the lost piece is what we're so afraid of.
Yes.
That with the wandering, like a little wandering is okay, but don't wander too far because you
And
might get
wondering
lost.
as long as you still have this ultimate
Yeah.
destination side in D&D, they call them side quests. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I come back to the main road, or there needs to be purpose to your wandering, which is it really wandering?
Yeah.
Is it?
It might
I'm
not
not sure.
actually be wandering if we're very busily having a purpose for our wandering.
And for me, this saying actually was really kind of settling because when I look back on so many of the things, including my work with animal therapy, I mean, I've done so many different things with my dogs, whereas a lot of people have one thing. And I'm very much oh, I want to try this. I did that. Okay, I've done that. Now let's do this. Okay, now I've done that. Oh, but I haven't done this. Let's try that. And that's kind of the wandering that I do, which is wonderful at staving off boredom. That's for sure. Um, but also can be seen as kind of erratic
Mhm.
or impulsive or any of those things, right? Why aren't you sticking to this
Yeah.
or getting better at this? Why isn't this, really? And so it's like, no, you don't need to. The wandering is helpful, healthy, fun, and useful, you know? Kind of like, and then, and this just came to me right now when I talk about one of the things. So my one therapy dog, Danny, loves to go on walks. And so whenever she works, when we're done, we go on, I call it a sniffy walk, a wander walk, right? I don't guide it. I'm gonna be honest, I do a little because I'm like,
You don't
okay.
wanna go into traffic or
And 10
people's
minutes
view.
after about 5 minutes in one spot, I'm like, "Okay, let's hurry it along." But for the most part, she chooses the direction, she chooses how long, and it's a very, very slow walk, very, very slow. And if we could all just be a little more like that, just kind of not worry about where you're going and just enjoy where you're at in the moment and breathe it in and embrace that the way she does, right? Um
Mhm.
With understanding, yeah, she doesn't have bills to pay or places to be or deadlines to meet, but, uh
Well, I mean, your summary there of Danny is exactly the personal coaching conversation I was having with myself yesterday because the last month has been just crazy busy with my husband. My son has been traveling a lot, and so my husband and I have been doing a lot more childcare for my daughter-in-law, covering her shifts and things like that while Justin's away. And I made that choice. I'm happy with that choice. And also, there's a piece of me that's like, I have a lot of work stuff that is not happening, and so yesterday I was like, but you actually made this choice. Like nobody's standing outside the door going, Colleen, when are you going to create that idea that's in your head? Except the the inside of me that's happening, And so when I can allow myself to just wander and sniff and be and say like, okay, so right now I'm doing more childcare than I would have chosen in my ideal world, but I am choosing to do it. Let me be present here now with this. And then when they go, let me be present with, the client work that's already booked and the projects that I'm dreaming of. They will come and there will be a time and it will be fine. Just like this whole be here now concept, which I think our actual skill in life is falling out of rapport with ourselves and then getting back in. Like this whole piece of like, I'm frustrated that I just can't get things done. Why can't I get things done? I'm wandering, I'm flaky, I'm disorganized, I'm distracted. Or maybe, okay, I wander, I'm disorganized, I get distracted, and that's just my life. That's my experience. It's okay. The things that really matter get done. It's all fine. It's all fine. And I can trust me to get it done. So I do think dogs are fabulous at kind of bringing us back into the moment and reminding us of that, like there she is. She had done her stuff and now she's on her sniff walk and she's going so slowly, just like, oh, this is an interesting little patch of grass. Oh my gosh, did you see that? Yeah, I do. Okay, but I wouldn't have if I'd been rushing along.
Right.
You know?
To get to that next whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever self-imposed or externally imposed deadline or requirement that we feel we need to, right?
Mm-hmm. So I've been thinking about the whole neurodivergent language lately. And this is a completely unformed thought. So hang on with me here for a second while I try to get it out, because I don't know that you have the answer, but I'm interested to hear your opinion. So you do not have to be the expert here.
Right.
But my feeling is that way more of us are neurodivergent than we ever had any idea. And that a lot of the testing that we have identifies some and misses others who might fit. And that my feeling is that in 15 years, neurotypical will be gone. Like that nobody will be typical because we will all have our own little place in this constellation of behaviors and thought processes and things like that. So as someone who works with kids whose parents think that they need extra support, what are your thoughts about that? Because I think some of the wandering comes in from that. If like we think that there is a typical thing,
Right.
and that for anyone who isn't doing what we think is typical, there's a concern. But when we actually look at individuals, who's typical?
I think you're 100% right. So first of all, one of the things you're hitting on is the umbrella of neurodivergent keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so our assessment and our understanding keeps evolving, which makes the umbrella bigger, which then makes eventually maybe the umbrella disappear. But I laugh because I want to say late, I'm trying to think, 1996 was, no, 97 was my first, 97, 98 was my first Asperger's client, which is no
Mm-hmm.
longer a diagnosis.
Right.
And after having worked in an autism clinic before then. And so being that I didn't have this, when I graduated, the DSM, which is the manual they use for diagnosing, had just changed. So Asperger's was not taught when I was in school. And then 2
Mm-hmm.
years later, here's this diagnosis. So I'm like, I got to get training. That's how I deal with everything, whether it's dogs, whether it's people, get me training. And so I started going to all these trainings, and a lot of the trainings at the time, and again, our understanding of autism has evolved significantly, would often bring in individuals who had lived experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so there would be a professional, and at the time, Tony Atwood was one of the big names. And
his book was the one that a psychologist handed me in 2002 and said, read this book. I'd like to talk with you about your son.
ahead of the curve. So yeah, great. I seen him speak, and he would have like Temple Grandin and other people
Mhm.
that,
And who I had already read, and I was like,
of course,
"Oh, interesting. Oh."
right? And so I was at a training in the late 90s, and there was an autistic individual who came on stage and joked at the time that autistics were the next evolution. They were more
Mhm.
evolved than we were, and that eventually the entire world, most of the world, not everybody, because there's always going to be some that aren't, right? That would be autistic. And now what you're kind of saying is just that, right? That aren't we, that as we see. And then I also have a theory that as neurodivergent brains are more accepted in our society, not only does that increase diagnosing because people
Mhm.
will accept the diagnosis, I also think that those genes are handed on
Mhm.
more than they would have been 50 years ago,
Mhm. Yeah, that's true too. I hadn't thought about that piece.
you know? And yeah. And
It's
so, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I don't have a diagnosis of any sort, but one of my sons is diagnosed with what had been Asperger's and now is high functioning autism. And one, as an adult, was diagnosed with ADHD. And he very, very tellingly said to me, "So, mom, they say it's, often got strong familial traits. And so they asked me, are you more like your mom or more like your dad? And it was you, mom." I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. So do I have a diagnosis? No. Do I say that I have ADHD? No. Do I match a lot of the patterns? Uh-huh. And it kind of goes with all who wander are not lost. Like that we do have people who are interested in multiple things in different ways and they can bring them together in a way that's right for them. And I may have said this on the podcast before, but my personal feeling is that the late bloomer theory is a myth, and that the reason people are late bloomers is they're finally able to control their environment enough to set themselves up for success, and that they couldn't bloom in the environment that was not set up for them. And so they're like, oh, they struggled all the way through school and then they got out. And then suddenly, for
Right.
some reason, they were able to really make something of themselves. Like, well, gosh, I wonder why. Hmm.
One of the things that has held true with all of my training, 35 plus years in working with uh, neurodivergence is something that I believe is true for all kids is the best outcome for children um, when they have a diagnosis of neurodivergence is a supporting environment who helps them find where they're supposed to be, kind of. But isn't that
Yeah.
true for everybody, right? Isn't that
Yeah.
true even for well, you know? It's
Right.
just I think in a neurotypical, it's much easier to find that, you know? So you put them in Little League and they found their spot, right? Or put
Right.
them in these more socially normed activities that are easy to find versus having to seek it out, and having to go out of the way to nurture it,
Right.
which is more work.
And I think with pet professionals, for many of us, the place we found connection and belonging was most easily with animals. And then
Yes.
with animals who, or with people who care about the animals too, like that piece, like the
Yeah.
initial entry point of the connection and belonging may have not been at a human level. Because that was a little trickier.
Much trickier and much less safe, right? Animals
Hmm.
are safe. And like any, when we look they talk about neurodivergent special interests. Reality is neurotypicals have special interests too, right?
Hmm.
There
For sure.
again, the special interest just might be more of the socially normed special interests. So again, if you're an American and you like baseball, nobody thinks that oh, yeah, you like baseball, no big deal. You know every single player and statistics. That's just being American, right? I don't know
Mhm.
any of those things, but many people do. Um, but if it's something more unique, like dogs or cats or cows or horses, and then it's like, well, seems not as, and largely because it doesn't fit in a normative pastime or traditional career.
Yeah.
So now, again, now you can get all sorts of formal education and working with animals and things way beyond being a vet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, as that becomes more normed, then that umbrella becomes more transparent almost, right? It's like the difference is no longer there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I want to put in a little pause here and tell people a backstory. Um, so I met you a couple years ago now. I don't remember exactly how many, 2, I think. Maybe a little bit more than that. When I put out a post on Facebook and said, I need someone to play cooperative care games with me because I have a dog with nails that are way long, a newly adopted dog. Well, I guess she wasn't newly adopted, whenever this was. But anyway, I had not solved my dog's nail issue and I needed someone to talk to about this. And you said, I'll play too. And we both made some decent progress in different ways with each of our dogs. Nothing that would make everyone astounded or want to see our logs. But the side benefit, and it's been such a huge one for me, is that when we would get together and talk, we would do quick little updates on how our training was going, and then we'd have these wild, far-reaching conversations, much like we've done today. So y'all are welcome. This is what happens when I have trouble with dogs' toenails, is I get to meet fascinating people like Jodi. Thank you, Jodi, who said yes to me, but also just the ideas and the fact that all of these things really, to me, feel very, very related. So just wanted to share that little background piece because I think it's so funny that we were brought together with this a little bit of insecurity about this is a problem that my dog is uncomfortable with, and I would just like a little accountability and support and creative ideas to bounce off of. And here we are talking about neurodivergence on a podcast a couple years later. That was not the plan.
Talk about wandering, right?
I know. We're not lost. We're happy out here.
Wandering into each other's lives and then wandering to where we are today. So who knows where we're going to wander to next, right?
I know. It's awesome. It's so fabulous. So I have so enjoyed this conversation today, as I always do. I'm curious if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
The easiest way is my website, which is www.playispowerful.com. I know we wandered a lot and didn't talk a lot about dogs, but I am more
We
than
talked about
happy
people,
to
and it's about
a
people.
lot about people. More than happy to talk to anyone who's interested in doing any of the therapy work, professionally or non, because I have done a lot of that, and there's a lot of insecurities, and I am very open. I love to wander into conversations with people about this and see where it will go. So feel free to reach out if interested.
Well, thank you so much, Jodi. It was so fun talking to you today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. I invite you to come learn more at ColleenPilar.com, where you can be steady, be strong, and be long.